We've tackled Hazelburn 10-year-old, and we've tangled with Longrow heavily peated. You had to know it was only a matter of time before we talked about Springbank 10-year-old. Hey guys, welcome back to Whiskey on the West Coast. My name is Matt, and today we're finally getting around to a proper review of the Springbank 10-year-old Campbeltown Single Malt Scotch Whisky. Now, if you've watched some of the previous videos, you know that Springbank is just one of my favorite distilleries, and I imagine it might be one of yours. And the Springbank 10-year-old is just one of those venerable bottlings that just, it always seems to deliver. And so I'm not breaking new ground here. There's plenty of Springbank 10 reviews out there, but you might have noticed I'm kind of in the middle of a Campbeltown series, more or less. You know, we've touched on Hazelburn 10, we touched on Longrow heavily peated. It always seemed natural for us to go ahead and tackle this Springbank 10-year-old before we moved on to a few others. Now, this bottling is 46% ABV, just like so much of the Springbank core range. It's non-chill filtered, it's natural colored, everything we expect from Springbank. This is 2.5 times distilled Springbank, so Longrow being the 2 times, Hazelburn being the 3 times, is the 2.5. This is kind of like moderately peated at 10 phenol parts per million. It's about 60% this batch anyway, this 2021 batch is 60% Ex-Bourbon Casks, 40% Sherry Casks, a very common and a very effective cask makeup for these Springbank 10-year-old releases. Now, I dived into some of the history behind the Springbank Distillery. I wanted to relay some of that to you because I did learn a few things that I didn't already know. So Springbank Distillery was founded in 1828 by William Reed, and this was actually 5 years after the Excise Act that legitimized the whiskey trade in Scotland. So William Reed acquires his distillery license in 1828, and he founds a distillery on what is believed to be the site of a former illicit distillery in Campbeltown. Almost a decade after this, he actually sold the distillery. He sold it to John and William Mitchell. And the Mitchells being a prominent whiskey family in Campbeltown, they had their fingers in so many different whiskey pots, apparently, from what I'm reading, many different aspects, including former illicit distilling on their own. Now, 1872, John's son Alexander replaced William Mitchell in that ownership of Springbank, which is how we get to J&A Mitchell, which is the name of the current owners of Springbank. Actually, you'll see it kind of on the bottleneck right here, J&A Mitchell and Co. So that's how we get to the current owners, which means actually Springbank Distillery is very similar to Glenfarclas Distillery in that they only had one owner prior to really their current owners now, which is pretty crazy. It's been passed on within that family who still owns it today. Interesting to note that the Mitchell who moved on from Springbank Distillery in 1872, William Mitchell, he actually left Springbank to found the Glengyle Distillery. And Glengyle should sound familiar to you because Kilkerran whiskey, Kilkerran 12, Kilkerran heavily peated, Kilkerran 8-year-old, and the 16-year-old, they are made at the Glengyle Distillery in Campbeltown, which as well happens to be owned by J&A Mitchell Co. So yeah, interesting fact there I did not know. Now, Campbeltown was destined to become the whiskey capital of the world, in part due to its location. It was a short shipping route away, past the Isle of Arran to the coastline, which meant that they could go ahead and ship their whiskeys to Glasgow, which wasn't all that far away. On top of it, they had all the natural resources they needed to make whiskey at that time. You could grow barley in the area, you had access to peat, and he had access to coal to help fire the stills. Really, they had everything they needed. And on top of this, because there was all the elements they needed to make whiskey in the area, they also had centuries old knowledge of whiskey making just with the people, which is invaluable on its own right. Now, Campbeltown and Springbank, obviously, Springbank wasn't immune to the whiskey downturn that they had in particular in the 1920s. And Springbank closed for the first time for 7 years between 1926 and 1933. And it wasn't actually the only time that Springbank would close. It's a weird thing to think about Springbank closing now with how popular it is, but this would occur once more in 1979, this time for 8 years, and it would reopen in 1987. Now, Springbank is pretty famous in whiskey geek circles for being one of the very few distilleries that carries out every aspect of their process of the whiskey making, from bottling their own whiskey and making the labels to obviously malting their own peat on their own malting floor. They do everything, and they do everything old school and in the right way. What's really fascinating is that in 1960 they actually closed their own floor maltings. They didn't malt their own barley until about 1992 again. So there was a 32-year window where Springbank wasn't actually malting their own barley, which I was surprised by. I'm really happy they do it now because I love everything that modern Springbank is. J&A Mitchell also owns one of the most important and influential independent bottling companies in Scotland, and that's the Cadenheads. And they, I believe they came into ownership of Cadenheads in 1969, and that's one of the things I'm actually really excited for my trip to Scotland. I'm going to Campbeltown as well as Islay and a few other places, and I've already booked a Cadenheads warehouse tasting as well as my tour of Springbank and Glengyle distilleries. So I'm super stoked about that, and I have a lot of respect for Cadenheads as an independent bottler. Springbank oozes old school character from its machinery to its look and the traditional way it makes whiskey. And since 2020, the distillery is more popular than ever. So I think it's about time we dug into this glass and talked about what this whiskey actually tastes like. All right, Springbank 10-year-old. 46% ABV, as I mentioned, non-chill filtered, natural color. And what a nose. I always love this nose. It's like a familiar friend. It's just, it's always there for you. So on the nose, fruits galore. Melon, pineapple, tropical fruit, probably some apples, but with this like diesel note in behind, which I love. Yeah, petrol fumes. Yeah, petrol fumes at like a fruit stand, like up in the Okanagan. You're driving the highway, you pull over, and you're shopping for some like Okanagan produce, maybe some pears, orchard fruit. But you got all the cars going by on the highway, fumes blowing. Industrial notes. I always think of like a machine shop, like you're in like I do a lot of fishing, and so like I have these center pin reels that are machined very precisely. I imagine like all the oils and all the machines running. I just imagine like the grease and oil and just the dirty, heavy smell to that place. I'm actually wearing a new fishing hoodie now from one of my favorite tackle shops. Fishing season can't come back soon enough. Yeah, machine shop. Coastal, there's some salinity, but more like minerality, like seashell sort of vibes. Yeah, dirty yet fruity, orange zest, maybe some like guava. I haven't even mentioned the peat yet. There's the light peat. The peat's very present, even though it's not like the central focus, which I love. I love it when peat is almost like a flavoring, like a spice. Something that adds to, as opposed to being the whole focus. So that's really nice. Check out the palate. Creamy, oily, fruity, funky, malty, tropical fruits again, melon, apple, pear and pineapple, but now the peat's kicking in. There's the smoke, but again, it's oily. It's full-bodied, and there's robustness to this. Some vanilla. That peat is still in there right now. The Campbeltown funk, the beloved Campbeltown funk, is there. I'm on the finish right now. It's beautiful, along with some leather and sweet malt. It's really nice. Oh man. Okay, another sip. just what a lovely chew this palate is. Like, man, oh man, I'm never disappointed by this whiskey. It's beautiful, and it's just gourmet. It's a gorgeous harmonized palate. Bourbon and sherry perfection. They're right at the right proportions. Yeah. I'm not saying anything that hasn't already been said about this whiskey. That's what I'm most worried about with this video. I feel like I'm just adding to an echo chamber, but really, when it's this good, is it an echo chamber, or is it just confirming what we already think we know? Yeah, that's gorgeous. On the finish again, smoke from the peat, it's there. Some seaside vibes. It just feels old school. There's nothing quite like it. And it hasn't been polished away. It's still there in all its glory. It's not something that's been overly refined to the point that it loses its power. It's just here in its elemental form. I love this whiskey. This is quintessential Springbank to me. The 10 punches way above its rank as a 10-year-old. Many people discredit 10-year-olds, and this is one of the best whiskeys out there for the price if you get it at MSRP. The distillate character shines through, and I just think it's one of the best of the core range. Yeah, so much good to say about it. It is batch dependent. Like, there's a lot of batch variation. I think my favorite batch of the Springbank 10 in my memory is from 2015. Some of these 2021s though just got insanely high marks. I never want to be without Springbank, and my apologies once again for adding to the echo chamber, but I'm going to give this a 90 out of 100 rating. That is my score, 90 out of 100. I toyed with scoring it higher, but just knowing that I have other Springbank 10s that I enjoyed more than this held me back from going any higher. It's something that every whiskey lover, especially Campbeltown whiskey lover, obviously has to try. So thank you once again for joining me on Whiskey on the West Coast, guys. I really love the comments. Keep engaging, keep talking to me. Let me know, Springbank 10, does it live up to the hype, or is it overrated? Let me know what your thoughts down in the comments. If you can go ahead and hit that like button, share with friends or people you think may be interested, and come back for more in the future. I appreciate you all. Thank you so much for tuning in. Until the next time, from the West Coast, Slàinte.